The sun hadn't yet fully risen when the stagecoach creaked to a halt on the dusty main road of Dry Hollow. The wheels stirred small clouds of dirt, settling over shuttered windows and half-swept porches. Mornings in this forgotten town began slow and stayed slower. But that day, a few curious eyes peeked out through curtains and door cracks, watching something or someone new. The door of the stagecoach opened, and a young woman stepped down with cautious movements, her worn-out boots landing softly on the dry earth. A faded dress clung to her frame, frayed at the edges, and a dull brown shawl hung loosely over her shoulders. She held a single small bag, tattered, heavy with the kind of things you don't see, memories, desperation, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a place that would finally let her breathe again. Her eyes, though shadowed by exhaustion, scanned the quiet street. Wooden signs creaked above closed shops. General store, saloon, barber, each door closed but alive with whispers behind them. A mother ushered her children inside. An old man at the corner spit tobacco and narrowed his eyes. No one smiled. The woman adjusted her shawl and reached inside her bag, pulling out a letter creased from countless folds. It bore a name she had read over 100 times. E. Callahan, Dry Hollow Ranch. The writing was plain, the tone formal, but the last line had burned into her soul. If you're honest and strong, I have work. Shelter, if needed. She had nothing else. At the far end of the street, leaning against a post near a tied horse, stood a tall man in a dark hat, dust on his coat and silence in his eyes. He watched her with unreadable stillness, arms crossed, boots planted like stone. He wasn't the kind to run to greet strangers, especially not ones who arrived in rags. She looked toward him, uncertain. Their eyes met across the empty street. No wave, no nod, just a shared recognition. Two people shaped by loneliness. He stepped forward at last, boots crunching the gravel. "You Eliza?" he asked, voice low, steady. She swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir. I got your letter." He gave a slow nod, glancing at the bag in her hand, then back at her. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "I didn't think I would either." He motioned toward his horse, tied to a small wagon. "Let's go. It's a long ride." She hesitated. "Are you still offering shelter?" He looked down the road, as if considering turning back, then shrugged. "You made it. That counts for something." She followed him to the wagon, climbing up beside him. He didn't offer his hand. She didn't ask. As they rode out of town, the whispers behind doors grew louder. Who is she? What's he thinking? But neither looked back. The road stretched ahead, dry and harsh like the life both had known. Silence sat between them, broken only by the creak of wheels and the occasional whinny of a horse. After some time, she gathered courage. "Thank you for not turning me away." He didn't look at her. "Haven't helped anyone in a long while. Don't expect much." "I don't," she said softly. "I just need a place to start again." The wind picked up, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. He glanced sideways, then quickly away. She noticed the edge in his jaw soften just slightly. They reached a long gate marking the start of Dry Hollow Ranch. Beyond it, vast acres of golden fields stretched into the hills, and a modest house sat lonely against the horizon. A barn leaned slightly, tired from years of work. Fences stood like stitched scars across the land. "This is it," he said. She stared ahead, then whispered, "It's more than I imagined." "It's just a ranch," he replied. "And I don't do charity. If you stay, you work." She nodded. "Yes, sir. I can work." He stopped the wagon and jumped down, offering no help as she climbed off. Still, she managed without stumbling. Inside, the house was clean but cold. No photos, no warmth, just walls and wooden quiet. A fire pit sat unlit. The air smelled of saddle leather and something faintly burnt. It wasn't welcoming, but it wasn't the street either. "You'll take the room on the right," he said, pointing down the hall. "I wake at 5. Chores start then. You'll clean, help with the animals, cook if you know how." He studied her for a moment. She didn't lower her eyes. He seemed almost surprised. He nodded once. "All right." She walked slowly to the room, opened the door, and found a small bed, a basin, and a window that faced the hills. No curtains, no color, but she smiled. It was the first roof she had earned. As she set her bag down and sat on the bed, her shoulders finally dropped. For the first time in weeks, she didn't have to move again. She pulled the letter from her pocket and tucked it beneath the pillow. Out in the hallway, he stood a moment longer, staring at the closed door, then turned away and walked back outside. The wind had picked up again. A storm was probably coming. But inside the quiet house, for the first time in a long time, someone had stayed. The first night under his roof was the quietest Eliza had ever known. No shouting, no crashing winds through broken walls, no fear of strangers pounding on the door, just the creak of old wood, the occasional groan of the wind against the shutters, and the subtle shifting of the man whose name she hadn't even dared to ask yet. I can learn. The next morning, long before dawn, she was already awake. She had folded the threadbare blanket and straightened her small bed, as if tidiness could earn her a place here. She washed her face in the cold basin and changed into the cleanest dress she had, though all of them bore soot stains and frayed seams. She stepped out into the hallway just as he was pulling on his coat. "You're up?" he said plainly. "I want to start early," she replied. He gave her a short nod and gestured toward the back door. "Animals first, then wood chopping. You'll help in the barn, clean the stalls. After breakfast, I'll show you the rest." There was no smile, no welcome, just terms, clear and without emotion. She didn't need kindness. She needed structure, rules she could live by, a system she could survive within. She followed him out into the crisp morning air. The ranch was even larger than it had looked the day before. Acres of pasture land stretched beyond the barn and chicken coops. The sky was wide and pale, untouched by city smoke or chaos. A few cows stood near the fence, tails flicking lazily. Horses whinnied as they heard the gate open. Eliza worked beside him silently, copying his movements, spreading hay, scrubbing troughs, checking hooves. Her hands blistered within the hour, but she made no sound. He never commented on her pace, only corrected her grip or her stance when necessary. "You'll need gloves," he said flatly. "I'll earn them," she answered. At breakfast, they sat opposite ends of the long table. She had cooked simple eggs and cornbread, nervous every time he took a bite. He never said whether it was good or bad, just ate, drank his coffee, and rose. "There's a list on the pantry door," he said before stepping out. "Follow it. I'll be back by evening." She was alone in the house again. Eliza wandered carefully through the rooms she was allowed in. The house was large, 3 bedrooms, a study, a cellar, but all felt cold. Not physically, perhaps, but emotionally barren. There were no photographs, no paintings, no color. Every surface was clean, every corner dust-free, and yet nothing felt lived in. There were no curtains on the windows, just simple wooden shutters. No fire in the hearth unless it was needed. No books on the shelves. Only tools, ledgers, and a few unopened letters. This wasn't a home. It was a shelter for someone who'd stopped believing in home. Eliza paused in the hallway, pressing a hand to the wooden wall. She thought of her last home, how different it had been. A cramped but lively cabin deep in the valley, warm with her mother's humming, her brother's laughter, and the smell of bread baking on cold evenings. Until the fire. The flames had taken everything. Her mother's hands, her brother's legs, the roof, the walls, the family. She'd survived barely. Then come the man who found her in town weeks later, speaking sweetly, promising marriage, shelter, care. He vanished the night before the wedding, left her with shame, gossip, and a reputation no one would touch. She closed her eyes tightly. The memories still burned. That was why she came here, because no one else would take her. But she would not be pitied. Pity was useless. It dried up, it faded, and then people turned away. No, she would earn her place here, not as someone feels sorry for, not as someone weak or broken. She would become as useful and solid as the beams holding this ranch together. By midday, she had cleaned the floors, washed the linens, fed the chickens, and stitched the torn curtain in the kitchen. She didn't wait for instructions, only followed logic. At sundown, he returned, boots dusty, shirt damp with sweat. He set down a sack of feed and glanced around. "You did the whole list," he said. She nodded and fixed the curtain. He raised an eyebrow, then said nothing. As he removed his coat, he paused. "You tired?" "Yes," she admitted, "but not done." That night, he said a few more words at dinner, just enough to mention the next day's work. Still no warmth, but also no coldness. They were two people under the same roof, not touching each other's lives, but not rejecting either. As she returned to her room, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The stars over Dry Hollow shone like distant promises. Hard to reach, but beautiful. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "I don't need charity. I just need time." In the hallway, beyond her door, the cowboy stood for a moment before blowing out the lantern. He didn't know what to make of her. Not yet. But something about her silence wasn't weakness. It was steel. The days began to blur into a rhythm, the kind that settled in your bones without asking. Eliza rose before the rooster crowed, tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and stepped into boots 2 sizes too big. Each morning, she built herself out of resolve, not hope. Hope was for those who had something left to lose. Her tasks were simple but unending. Sweep the floors, scrub the pots, fetch water from the well, clean the chicken coop, chop kindling. By the 3rd day, her muscles ached in places she hadn't known existed. The dust found her pores, her clothes, her fingernails, like the land itself was testing whether she could endure. The cowboy said little. He moved through the ranch like a shadow with purpose, efficient, solitary. He fed the horses, repaired fences, managed the livestock with the kind of silence that could fill a canyon. When he did speak, it was brief, measured, would need stacking. Don't let the chickens out too early. Rain's coming, bringing the laundry. Eliza never asked questions. She only nodded, adjusted her pace, and learned. She figured out which animals needed grain versus hay, how to secure the barn door in high wind, how to knead bread without wasting flour. By the 5th day, she noticed he'd stopped double-checking her work. He watched instead, not obviously, never directly, but she'd catch him out of the corner of her eye, standing by the porch while she fed the hens, leaning near the barn while she swept the stoop. His eyes carried weight, not cruelty, but memory. He wasn't judging her. He was remembering someone who no longer walked these halls. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old cupboard, Eliza found a small carved horse tucked behind jars. It was hand-whittled, smooth and worn. A child's toy, perhaps. She didn't ask. She simply dusted it gently and placed it on the mantel, a quiet offering. Later that evening, she saw it was gone, back in the cupboard. Maybe, or perhaps in a drawer. The silence swallowed all hints. That night, after the chores and a simple dinner, she lingered in the kitchen. The sun had dipped below the hills, leaving only a soft purple dusk through the windows. As she scrubbed the last of the dishes, she began to hum, a soft, slow tune, barely louder than breath. It was a lullaby her mother used to sing while stirring stew over the fire, when her brother was still small and the world still kind. She didn't realize she was doing it until she turned and found him standing in the doorway. He didn't speak, just stood there, still as stone, eyes far away, not at her, but somewhere long before her. A memory tugged loose by that melody. His jaw shifted, and for a moment he looked not distant, but undone. She froze, unsure whether to stop or continue. But the moment passed. He turned without a word and walked out. The next morning was colder. Wind bit at the seams of the windows, and frost hugged the edges of the trough. Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter and went about her routine, hands stiff with chill. When she came in for breakfast, she paused at the kitchen table. A pair of leather gloves rested on the wood, not new but well kept. Her size. The stitching was neat. He was in the room, and there was no note. She stared at them, heart thudding, not because of what they were, but because of what they meant. They weren't charity. They were acknowledgement, a wordless way of saying, "You're earning your place." She picked them up slowly, turned them over in her hands, then slid them on. They fit snugly, warm even before the sun had touched them. That day, She worked longer, lifted heavier, stood taller. For the first time since arriving, she looked at the ranch not just as a place she was trying to survive, but as a space she might one day belong to. The wind had howled all afternoon, turning the horizon into a swirl of dust and gray. By evening, the sky cracked open and poured its grief across the land. Thunder rolled low like a warning growl, and lightning lit up the walls in sharp, fleeting flashes. Inside the ranch house, the fire and the hearth fought bravely against the cold seeping through every crack. Eliza had just placed a kettle over the flames when the lamps flickered, once, twice. Then died. The power was out. She didn't panic. Old storms had taught her how to live in darkness. The cowboy lit a few candles, setting them on the mantel and windowsills. Shadows danced across the wooden walls, softening the hard lines of the furniture and of his face. "Storm will pass by morning," he said, settling into the chair near the fire. Eliza nodded, sitting on the floor beside the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees. The firelight flickered across her face, warm against the chill that hovered just outside the walls. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the rain. It was a kind of quiet that felt almost sacred, not awkward, but full of unspoken thoughts. Then, softly, she spoke. "I was 16 when the fire took our home." He turned slightly, but didn't interrupt. "It started in the back room," she continued, eyes locked on the flames. "We lived above a small clinic my father ran. I was training to help him, learning to clean wounds, take pulses, calm crying babies. It was going to be our legacy. A healer's line." She swallowed hard. "My little sister was sick that night. I went to get more blankets. By the time I smelled the smoke, it was too late. The storm raged louder outside, but inside, her voice was clear and steady. They said it wasn't my fault, but I was the only one who walked out. The cowboy didn't speak, didn't reach for her, but his stillness held her words like a cradle. No judgment, no pity, just space. I wandered after that," she said. "Found work in towns that needed hands. But no one stays sick forever, and I wasn't the kind of woman men wanted to marry. Too much weight behind my eyes," they said. He looked at her then, not with sympathy, but with understanding. "I built this ranch for someone," he said finally, voice low. Eliza looked up. She loved wildflowers. Said she wanted to grow fields of them one day. "I cleared land, saved every cent, carved this place out with callous hands." A pause. "She married a banker from Denver before I even finished the roof." For a long moment, nothing else needed saying. The storm outside screamed. Inside, only the fire popped and crackled. She gave a quiet sigh. "I guess we both tried to build futures with people who didn't wait for us." A small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Or didn't believe in what we were building." She glanced over, surprised by his attempt at humor. "That's one way to put it." He shifted in his seat, leaning closer to the fire. "You think if they saw us now, working ourselves to the bone, trying to make something out of ash, they'd regret it?" Eliza blinked. Honestly, she paused, then laughed, a soft, surprised sound, like something fragile breaking free. "No, they're probably warm, rich, and well-fed." He raised an eyebrow. "You laugh like that often?" She shook her head, still smiling. "Not in years." There it was, the moment, not love, not even comfort, but a quiet crack in the wall between them. She leaned her head against the hearthstones, watching the fire. He didn't ask anything more, but he stayed in the chair until the storm faded into gentle rain and the candles burned low. When she rose to leave for her room, he stood as well. "Good night," he said. This time, she didn't just nod. She looked at him fully, tired, vulnerable, and entirely real, and said, "Thank you." And something in his expression softened. The sun was barely over the horizon when Eliza stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. The cowboy was already by the wagon, checking the reins and inspecting the wheels like he didn't trust even solid wood anymore. "We'll be back before dark," he said gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes. Eliza nodded. It had been weeks since she last stepped into town. The idea of fresh fabric, herbs for tinctures, and maybe a new kettle stirred something like excitement in her, until the weight of what others might say settled in. They rode in near silence. The clop of the horses and the creak of the wagon were their only companions. Occasionally, he'd point out something, a broken fence post, a hawk's nest in the trees, but mostly they just rode. Two people trying not to acknowledge the nervousness quietly bubbling between them. As they reached the edge of town, Eliza could already feel it. Eyes. The townsfolk paused mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-purchase. Whispers curled like smoke. Is that her? She's the one living at Grant's place. Didn't think he'd taken another woman so soon. They parked the wagon outside the general store. Eliza hopped down, brushing the dust from her skirt. She kept her head high, her back straight, but inside, something clenched. Inside the store, the air felt thicker. The shopkeeper nodded stiffly, eyes flicking between them. No smiles, no small talk, just watchful glances. It wasn't until she turned toward the fabric shelf that a voice, sugar-sweet and venom-laced, cut through the room. Well, I'll be... Grant, you finally replaced her. Eliza turned slowly to see a tall woman with perfect curls and a voice dipped in honey, but her eyes held frost. She leaned against a barrel like she owned the whole town. Didn't think you'd go for the strayed dog type, the woman added, lips curling into a smirk. Eliza didn't respond. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her feet felt rooted. She glanced once toward the cowboy. He was glaring, jaw tight, then turned back to the shelf, forcing her hands not to tremble. She didn't need to fight. Not today. But it still stung. By the time they finished loading the supplies, Eliza's silence had turned cold. She climbed into the wagon without waiting for him. Halfway home, he finally spoke. She's bitter. Eliza stared straight ahead. I never loved her, he continued. She just didn't like being second choice. She turned, her voice low. Do they all think I'm just filling someone's shoes? He met her eyes, the horses slowing as if sensing the weight in the air. People will talk, he said firmly, but I only care what's real, what's in front of me. Eliza looked away, her chest tightening, not from pain this time, but from something warmer. He didn't owe her that kindness, and yet he gave it. They reached the ranch by sundown. As he unloaded the wagon, she lingered on the porch, staring out across the open land. The gossip had left marks, but his words had softened the blow. That night after dinner, she found in the barn tending to a saddle. I never said thank you, she said softly. He looked up, for standing up, even if it was just with words. He put the saddle down, wiping his hands. Should have said more before. They stood there for a moment, the barn quiet except for the breath of the horses. Something shifted. Not romance. Not yet. But a mutual recognition. Two people who had been judged, hurt, left behind, yet still standing. The first sign of change came with the wildflowers. Eliza bent over the garden patch near the front porch, her hands deep in the soil. It had once been nothing more than a square of dry earth, forgotten and packed hard by years of neglect. Now, tiny green shoots poked through. Rows of beans, marigolds, and tomatoes waited patiently for the sun. The cowboy watched from the doorway, a mug of coffee in hand. She didn't notice, or pretended not to, but when she wiped her brow and turned, their eyes met. He gave a small nod and turned back inside, leaving the door open behind him. Inside the house, her quiet touches were everywhere now. Soft curtains hanging from the kitchen window, a clean tablecloth, books arranged on a shelf she found empty. Even the way the chairs were turned slightly toward each other hinted that someone finally lived here, not just existed. Her hands made the place warmer. Word had begun to spread in town, not the kind that dripped with spite, but whispers tinged with curiosity. She helped a miller boy, fever broke by morning. I heard she stitched up old man Harrow's hand, right there on the back of her wagon. One by one, the suspicious glances turned to nods of thanks. No grand gestures, just small acknowledgments. A pie left at the gate, a bag of dried herbs gifted in return. People were beginning to see her not as the woman at Grant's ranch, but as Eliza. She cleared a space in the barn side room. Just a corner, nothing more. A table, some cloth, a clean water basin. There, anyone could come who needed help but couldn't afford a doctor. One morning, a woman came with her baby. The next, a man limping from a mule's kick. Eliza never turned anyone away. The cowboy found her there often, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't say much, but once he left a wooden shelf outside the door, something he'd made himself, for her bandages and jars. He said simply, "At dinner." He lingered longer now. She caught him smiling sometimes. Faint, brief, but real. He laughed once. Suddenly, when she burned the bread and blamed the wind. "I haven't heard that in years," she said, half joking. "Didn't know I still could," he replied. They moved around each other with a rhythm, quiet, unspoken. She would set the kettle before he asked. He would refill the firewood before she noticed it was low. Neither named it, but was there. Comfort, trust, something fragile but growing strong like the garden outside. One afternoon, as she hung fresh curtains in the hallway, she paused and looked around. The walls were still wooden and old, but they no longer echoed with silence. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, freshly scrubbed, and thought, "This feels like a place where I belong." Not because he had said it, not because anyone had offered it, but because she had built it, bit by bit, with her hands, her care, her heart. That night, he found her on the porch, sipping tea. "I saw what you did with that side room," he said, sitting beside her. "I just figured the place had space. Might as well be useful." He looked out at the land stretching into the dusk. "It's more than useful," he said. "You've turned it into something good." She smiled, quiet and grateful. They sat there a long time, not speaking, just watching the sky change color. Inside, the house glowed with a warm light. Outside, two people sat side by side, not bound by obligation or rescue, but by something gentler. The morning began like any other. The sun rose behind the hills, golden rays warming the edges of the old barn. Eliza was in the garden, trimming the growing vines with a content smile on her face. Birds chirped, and the wind was gentle. Then, hooves. She looked up. A lone rider approached, his figure unfamiliar, but his posture too confident to ignore. The dust didn't cloud her memory. It carried it forward, faster than her heart could prepare. As the horse slowed and the rider dismounted, her breath caught. She knew that face, the sharp jaw, the smug grin, the eyes that once lied with sweetness. Thomas. He removed his hat casually, eyes sweeping over her as if nothing had changed. "Well, look at you. Fancy little setup you got here." Eliza's hands tightened around the garden shears. "You need to leave." He smirked. "You owe me, Eliza. You walked away before the debt was cleared, and I've come to collect one way or another." The past came crashing back. The promises, the lies, the way he'd taken her savings and vanished, leaving her with nothing but whispers and a broken heart. "I don't owe you a damn thing," she said, voice shaking but steady. He stepped closer, menace creeping into his smile. "That's not how I remember it. You come back with me, or you'll wish you had." She turned to run, not in fear, but to get away before rage took over. But he grabbed her arm. Before she could scream, he was gone, thrown. The cowboy had appeared like a shadow from the porch. One firm hand had yanked Thomas back and slammed him into the dirt. His calm eyes burned. "You'll take your hands off her," he said coldly, "and you'll leave this ranch. Now." Thomas stood up, brushing himself off, fuming. "You think she belongs to you? You don't even know what kind of mess she's." "She belongs to no one," the cowboy snapped. "Least of all to you." Thomas opened his mouth, but something in the cowboy's stance silenced him. He turned, spitting dust, and walked to his horse. "This isn't over," he muttered before riding away. The silence left behind was loud. Eliza stood frozen, the sting of old pain flaring in her chest. She turned away, pushing past the porch into the house. He didn't follow right away. When he did, she was by the fireplace, trembling, arms wrapped around herself. "I never wanted to bring trouble here," she whispered. Her voice broke in the word trouble, as if even that was more than she could bear. He stepped closer. "You didn't bring trouble. Eliza, that man was trouble." She shook her head. "I built something here. With my hands. With peace. And now—" He gently took her hand. You brought light. That man was a storm. Her eyes filled. Why did you help me? He looked at her, really looked at her. Because you never asked for pity. You asked for nothing, and gave everything. For the first time, she cried, not out of weakness, but release. And he didn't try to fix it. He just stayed with her. Silent, solid, present. Later that night, as the fire died down and the shadows danced on the walls, she whispered, I don't want to run anymore. You don't have to, he said. Not here. Outside, the wind picked up. But inside, the ranch stood warm, quiet, and unshaken, a home no longer haunted, but held. The weeks passed quietly, the dust of confrontation settling like morning dew. Autumn had begun to kiss the leaves with golden hints, and the ranch, once hollow and cold, now breathed with the warmth of life. Eliza moved with rhythm now. Her days were full, tending to the garden, helping locals, treating the occasional cough or wounded hand in the small space she'd lovingly converted into a clinic. Word spread beyond the town. Travelers now brought kin for her gentle hands and calm voice. The townsfolk had changed too. The once judging glances were now warm nods and smiles. Women came for advice, children brought her wildflowers, and ranchers began leaving small offerings. Eggs, wool, fresh milk. She never asked. She only gave. And quietly beside it all, the cowboy watched. He'd stopped calling her the girl or her. Now, in rare soft moments, he'd say Eliza with something almost like reverence. He joined her for meals more often. He laughed. He even fixed a barn roof she kept reminding him about, and didn't grumble once. But one morning, she woke to find something new. Beside the house, where an old guest shack had once leaned tiredly against time, now stood a freshly rebuilt cottage. The wood was strong, windows framed carefully, curtains already hanging. Smoke drifted from a small chimney. She blinked at it, unsure what she was seeing. He stood nearby, hands in pockets, eyes avoiding hers. You said you never wanted to rely on anyone, he said. So I figured maybe you want a place of your own. Still close, but yours. She turned to him, confused. You rebuilt the entire thing? He shrugged. Didn't do much else with my time. She looked again. The neat porch, the flowers planted beside the door, even a clothesline ready. Then she saw something else. A small wooden plaque above the door. Eliza's corner. Her breath caught. Is this? He cleared his throat. It ain't a ring, he muttered. But I figured if you're going to stay, might as well have a place that's yours always. She stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, not just of joy, but of deep, settled love. I'll stay, she said, stepping toward him, but only if I still get to work. He smiled, soft and sure. Wouldn't want it any other way. Days turned to weeks again. The cottage became her space, but the lines between their lives blurred lovingly. She brought bread to his table. He left tools in her porch to fix. Sometimes she found flowers in a jar on her windowsill. She never asked where they came from. They weren't married. Not yet. But they didn't need paper to tell the world what they already knew. They belonged here with each other. One evening, as the sun lowered and bathed the valley in gold, they saddled up. He opened the gate and she rode beside him, not behind, not ahead. Together, the wind carried the scent of wheat, and the horses moved in unison, their silhouettes stretching across the quiet land. She looked at him, once a stranger, now home. And he looked at her, once a guest, now the heartbeat of his life. In the hush of twilight, the narrator's voice seemed to whisper over the horizon. She arrived with only hope. He gave her a future, and she gave him a reason to live.